Colleagues, I think Alexei Vladimirovich will join us later. So we're starting our session. I think it's a very interesting one. It's about the Moskva River. It is a topic, an area which has been addressed very aggressively for the past few years, according to different rankings. When the city starts addressing its river, when the city starts improving the quality of river water, starts engaging with embankment beautification projects, it signifies a certain level of development. Now we're living through a very interesting moment in time. We are rethinking the river. Back in the 30s, it served the purpose of a facade of Moscow. People admired it. Now it's getting closer to the people. It's becoming more common to people, and I'm very happy that we have really great panelists here at this table. Mr. Byrykov, Deputy Moscow Mayor for Housing, Utilities and Amenities. Sergei Kuznetsov, Chief Architect of Moscow. Then we have Victoria Wagner, very interesting speaker. She represents Publica, Project Director. Alexander Washburn, Chief Urban Designer or Chief Urban Planner of New York City under Michael Bloomberg. Olga Kotova, Deputy Director General for Strategic Development and Marketing, Flotilla Radisson Royal. If you've been to Zaryadye, you've noticed the boats that moor here. Yuri Grigoryan, head of Project Meganome Architecture Studio, and Alexei Shaposhnikov, chairman of the Moscow City Duma. Let's stick to the main route of our debate, and let's start with Mr. Byrykov. Let's ask him to tell us the current attitude to the Moscow River on the part of the city and what actions are going to take vis-à-vis the Moscow River. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Before I begin with my presentation, talking about Moscow River and other rivers in Moscow, I must say that we had come a long way. It took us 9 years. We started with Moscow residential areas, yards, parks, with landscaping parks. Now there are about 750 organized areas, used to be 130 areas in the past. So through the wishes of Muscovites, we arrived at the program My Street, which allowed us to landscape 350 streets, a huge number of public spaces across the city. In 2010, we had only one pedestrianized street, Arbat, Old Arbat. Now we have 350 pedestrianized areas. They draw Muscovites, tourists. That's the place where people celebrate their holidays. And then the mayor set the task in consultation with the Muscovites. What else can we do? What else can be done? And 5 years ago, we started tying up different streets, Arbat, Sadova, Tverskaya, with the junction points with the river, Moscow River. And at the end of last year, a decision was made to turn the Moscow River into an accessible pedestrianized area, leisure area, recreational area, set up sports centers, set up playgrounds, sports grounds for winter sports, summer sports. And I think we've achieved this. As of now, we have landscaped spaces about 55 kilometers long landscaped embankments. It's at 27% of all waterfront areas and embankments in the city of Moscow. We started landscaping areas around the central embankment. We started with this Moscow city, reaching the garden ring next to Taganka. We're talking 17 kilometers of public spaces. This is the central portion. Then decisions were made to beautify separate waterfront areas that had fallen on hard times, had been dilapidated, neglected, but had a very strong potential for improvement. So the 850 anniversary park, so this park now extends for over 19 kilometers. This park now reaches Pechatniki region, Pechatniki neighborhood. So we beautified these areas. We set up separate parks, housing, playgrounds, sports grounds, again in response to Muscovites' requests and wishes. And so we created this peerless infrastructure. Then the opposite side of the Moscow River, next to the Bratieva district, it used to be recreational area, very unkempt, untidy. Last year, 390 hectares of the spaces, 17 kilometers long, underwent beautification, landscaping. So we co-joined Bratinsky Park, Cascade Park, joined it with Bratievska area, creating a huge cluster of sports facilities, leisure facilities, created access points to the Moscow River. The main idea was to ensure pedestrian traffic, to create leisure centers, leisure facilities, to create bike lanes. These are year-round parks. So you can go skiing in the winter. We have artificial skating rinks in the summertime. Pedestrian areas, barbecue areas, bicycle lanes, again, leisure places. This year, this landscaping work is continuing. Just to repeat, out of 200 kilometers of embankments, 55 have been beautified. This year we're planning to beautify additionally 17 kilometers. So we're going to have, towards the end of this year, 70 kilometers worth of landscaped embankments. So what did we do, what we're doing this year? First of all, upon consultation with the Muscovites, we asked Muscovites what they would like to see. For example, look at the Pechatniki neighborhood. Different sports, 60 hectares, brownfield area, derelict area. Today it houses the largest center for technical sports. It's not even 1 year old, but it has already hosted different competitions. It is far away from the housing district, so the noise, the racket of the engines is not interfering with people's lives. Residents are fine. We created this center, this facility, and now it's being used by the young people who enjoy technical sports. So whatever park you pick, it has its own distinct feature. This year we're completing the landscaping of the left embankment, the left bank of the river next to from 850th Anniversary Park all the way to the ring road. Sergei Semyonovich Sobyanin mentioned this today. We're talking about areas far away from the city center, brownfield areas, areas where they still have a refinery, I must say that the executives of the refinery adopted a program approved by the city authorities, and they have cut down their emissions into the Moscow River by 75%. Now the refinery complies with all environmental requirements.
But we need to make sure that the adjacent territories also fulfill these necessary norms. That's why we had consultations with Muscovites. I had 3 meetings with people, and now 70% of all the territory in Kapotnia is being redeveloped according to the My District project. We renovate houses, we add insulation. It's about 77 houses which we work with. We create special lighting. We work with pavements as well. We organize different events, and we also improve and update engineering communications, because we want this district to be comfortable for living for the coming decades. There is additional territory of 120 kilometers along the river, and now we are going to turn it into a very comfortable park near the river. We are going to have 43 kilometers, which will be covered with trees, which will be turned into the park. In coming 4 years, we want to renovate left and right embankments of the Moscow River. And at the same time, all of these new spaces will be connected to houses, to residential areas, adjacent territories. And Muscovites like to spend time near the river. We want to make embankments accessible to everyone. We want to move out all the factories from the embankment territory. We want to create pavements along the whole river. It was a difficult task. We, of course, needed to understand which parts are going to be officially historical, which parts will be turned into pedestrian territories, and where do we need to have new roads. This is really a massive project. We need to coordinate different services of the city. Engineers, architects, designers, all of them should work together. And of course, those who are responsible for everyday maintenance should participate in this work. We engaged designers and architects from Russia, and in 2010 we had 3 architectural project institutes. Right now we have already 20 bureaus and institutes. All of them now are working on certain urban planning projects. We wanted to create good access by car. We wanted to create additional parking lots, and we've achieved that goal. Now we have autonomous zones which can be used for sport activities, which could be used for leisure. All of these zones are equipped with some additional sports and entertainment equipment. There is good lighting, there are rental services, medical facilities. So, for example, at Pechatniki Park, we can do sports, we can stroll, we can rest. We cooperate with the transportation services, because we need to make sure that transport can get access to such parks and people can use public transport for moving in and out. In the past 4 and 5 years, we've done a lot promoting new festivals. For example, the Festival of Lights. We organize such festival in Brateva Cascade Park on a regular basis. Of course, we need to provide medical services for Muscovites, and at a design stage, we already thought through the access for ambulances and additional medical facilities. So that's good that we all worked together and we achieved great results. I was talking about the Moscow River, but we also have another river, Yauza. 90% of the territory along Yauza is also renovated. But then we got some advice from deputies. For example, Alexei Shaposhnikov helped us a lot. He does a lot organizing public events there. Of course, not everything is smooth and easy. We do have a lot of discussions with people. We have discussions at the Aktivny Grazdanin, Active Citizen portal. So we get feedback from people. And we get a lot of requests and proposals from citizens. We always try to take them into account. And as a result, we get very comfortable urban spaces. We are trying to create beautiful and comfortable city. We want to provide great entertainment and leisure opportunities for Muscovites, not only on the territory of parks of Moscow, but throughout Moscow. Such spaces, cultural spaces, leisure spaces, they were designed for Muscovites, for tourists, for everyone who visits Moscow. Every year, parks and entertainment centers are visited by 127 million people. And that's not the limit for us. We continue our work. We speak with Muscovites. We invite experts for discussions. For Russian and foreign experts, they give us advice on such tasks and projects. Thank you very much for very detailed presentation. You explained very well what's going on, what's happening with the Moscow River. And this is great that you talked about international community, architectural community. That's why right now here we can give the floor to Yuri Grigoryan. His team won the international competition.
За это время действительно была сделана достаточно большая проектная.
They've done a lot of work. And now they have specific documentation ready. And it's great that colleagues continue cooperating with and speaking with citizens and with the expert community. So there is such a community which is called Friends of the Moscow River. We talked about it at the Architectural Festival recently. And Yuri was talking about these changes in engaging with the Moscow River. Can you tell us more about your work and the challenges that you have right now? Yes, that's true that recently we won an international competition, Future Ports. It was the name of our project that won. So our idea was to create such hubs, activation hubs. We wanted to make the river clean and accessible. Clean, this is very important for us. That's why this word is the first word in our motto. We understand that this is important, but no one wants to do that. It costs a lot of money, and it's not really trendy to go swimming on the Moscow River. But it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, tomorrow in Brateva there will be a long swimming marathon near Brateva, and that's also the project connected to the Friends of Moscow River project. Yes, they're not afraid. Yeah, they're not afraid. changing the optics, changing the view on the Moscow River. That's our idea. We understand that there is a city, but separately there is also the river, and river has its own rights. We can't think that river is something separate. We can't think that river that's something we simply use and exploit. Historically, river was for transporting cargo. It was for we were putting sewage waters into the water river, and now the situation is different. And we think that we owe this river a lot, and we need to start cleaning it. And if we make it clean throughout the city so that people can go swimming on the Moscow River, regardless of the location, that would be amazing. I think this would be the new level of relations between a human being and nature. Why do we think that cleaning up is so important? It's easy for us to make the river active and accessible. So, for example, we heard in the previous presentation about this pedestrian roads along the river, so that it's possible to cross the river, it's possible to stroll along. We have different alternative ways of transportation. We have good access with the public transport. This is great. This is like a framework, this is like a backbone for connecting all the spaces in Moscow. I would say that the Moscow River, that's the main street of Moscow. You can see the university, you can see the Kremlin when you travel along the river. And of course, it's a very beautiful object, the river, I mean. But I think we need to think about environment, we need to think about urban planning and redevelopment. All of these projects should go hand in hand, and we need to love the river. And if we love her, she will show her affection back towards us. We spoke with Victoria Wagner before the beginning of the session a little bit, and it turned out that we have similar projects. She is also responsible for creating urbanistic concepts. She's done a very interesting research on territories along the Thames. And she was thinking about the cultural significance of this river for London. Are you going to do something else with regards to your projects? Are you going to have some consequences and steps as a result of your research? And tell us about the role of Thames for London.
Yes, to answer your question backwards with the last bit first, I was hoping to tell you a little bit about the River Thames in London and some of the challenges and some of the opportunities it faces, as well as its role for the city as a whole. And hopefully we can find some parallels with Moscow River and other international cities. For those who don't know Publica, we are a research-led urban design practice, and our work is based on a methodology of fieldwork, research and engagement, which we apply to every project that we do. So we always start with the place and understanding the place before we make any intervention or any proposal. So a little bit of context before we dive into the Thames about the project that you are referring to. So we have worked in London over several years, over 9 years, mapping and studying the whole city, and in many cases the spaces next to the river. But we have recently worked on a particular project for the London Mayor's culture team and the Port of London Authority. So it's a joint project, which is really significant. It's the first time that they have joined on a culture project. And the project was a scoping study to explore the opportunities for culture on the Thames. And after all, as you're saying, the role of the Thames, I mean, London exists because of the Thames. That's why it is there. And so surely it should be at the centre of its cultural life. But at the moment, there are very many challenges. So to tell you a little bit about the Thames first, no two rivers are the same, of course, but there are a few things that make the Thames particularly special or unique or different. And firstly, it's tidal. And as one of the stakeholders that we interviewed and spoke to told us, it's the North Sea coming to meet London twice a day, which I thought was quite a romantic way to think about this moving, dynamic river. Secondly, the river's character and scale varies greatly from one end of the city to the other. So in the west of London, it's very, very narrow, it's very calm, people swim, it's not tidal the whole way, and it's very gentle, it has a very direct, very visceral relationship with the river, so people really access it and have a much better connection to the river. On the east of London, it's a very different story. It's ex-industrial land. There's very limited connection to the river, and it's very wide and very undeveloped, and that's changing rapidly in London. It's also a working river, so it accommodates the UK's second biggest port, and it's the UK's busiest inland waterway. So there are many functions that often compete, which can be a real challenge to work within. The river is also really rich ecologically, which surprises people because it's brown. People assume it's dirty, but it's just silt. It's just mud that's caught in the river. And so there are sea otters, and there are seahorses and seals and all these kind of amazing animals, 125 different types of fish, and you hardly ever see them, but they're there. And that's a really big achievement for London because the Thames was declared ecologically dead in the 1950s, so it's really recovered ecologically. It also connects lots of green spaces. It was really interesting to hear how the Moscow River connects so many green spaces. London is the same. The Thames connects 14 major metropolitan parks, almost 900 public open spaces, and thousands and hundreds of cultural buildings and listed structures. And it's the only river in the world to link 4 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So it all sounds great, it has all these assets, but actually London has really lost its relationship to the river. I think some people have a very direct relationship if they go kayaking in certain parts, but actually as a general population, you can cross the river and you can be next to it, but actually that kind of connection it has a lot of potential, but is underplayed at the moment. And there are certainly a lot of challenges that partly have resulted in that. One of them is this idea of perception that we talked about before of the river being dirty or sort of being uninviting. The other is the number of stakeholders involved, which is the same in any city, but the particular difficulty in London is that there are 33 different local authorities across London. 17 of those touch the river. And so there are 17 local authorities looking after spaces on the river. But what's interesting as well is that the boundaries of those local authorities are often down the middle of the river. And so to try and do projects and collaborate across the two banks is actually really challenging.
So it's in the middle of the river itself?
Yeah, it's a sort of governance line. And it's sort of just, sometimes it includes the bridges, but generally it's like half the river is, one local authority.
So if you want to make a bridge, but the 2 boroughs should...
That's exactly, and that's a project that I'll talk about that's happening in London right now. They've had to do, for 15 bridges, 30 different planning applications. So it's very difficult, and I think that has stopped local authorities from engaging with the river, particularly because it's not just that it's difficult technically, you also have to engage with the Port of London Authority. There are a lot of steps that make it hard, and so it's been easier, particularly for boroughs and local authorities that don't have the same resource, to just turn their back on the river. That's sort of much simpler, but a shame, obviously. And so that kind of lack of collaboration or cooperation is a real challenge, especially considering how many organizations are working on the river to really doing some great, fantastic work. But there are lots of small agents kind of bottom up, and it's how to join that up with the kind of top-down approach. So how to meet somewhere in the middle so you make the most of the the kind of skills and the knowledge of all the experts who really know the river, as well as having a kind of overarching strategy that means that everyone knows which direction they're moving in. The other big challenge is connectivity. So London is relatively well connected in its public realm, but to the east of the river, this isn't the case. The public realm is really limited, and you can't even access, even trying to do this project, trying to get to the river to photograph it, map it, we couldn't. We had to go from the water. So it's really difficult, and it's that physical cutting off can be a challenge to those residential communities which live in the east of the river. And transport on the river as well has so much potential. So that's really developing. There's a pier strategy coming soon from the Transport for London. But what I find really interesting as an idea, and which is part of this idea of perception, of public perception of the river. There are river buses on the Thames. Most Londoners don't know that they exist. They would never think, oh, that's a piece of public transport. And partly, I think that is because of the design identity of them. London has this fantastic design identity for its public transport infrastructure. Everyone knows the tube roundel. Everyone knows a red bus. But on the river, you can't distinguish the river buses from the other boats. And I think that's something that I was really taken going to New York, actually, and seeing the Brooklyn Bridge Park and those ferries with the NYC, clearly stated on there. You kind of know, okay, that's public transport. So that's another challenge. And also communication, there's no other, the cultural activity of the Thames, although there is quite a lot, the best place to find it at the moment is the website of the Port of London Authority, which is not a natural, intuitive place to go if you visit London and want to know what's going on the river. You don't go to the port. So there are lots of things that could be done to sort of join up and really sort of, I guess, almost have a campaign to sort of improve people's perceptions of the river. But there are lots of changes coming to London, which I think should really change our relationship to the river. One of them is the construction of new sewer, the Thames Tideway Tunnel. It's called the Super Sewer. And the river at the moment does have some sewage in it, which is not great. So obviously the old Victorian era sewers spill over into the river. And so this new Super Sewer will take that away and clean up the river a lot more. And also it's going to introduce new public spaces along its whole stretch. So that's a great opportunity. And London's undergoing change at an unprecedented scale. Really, really large parts of East London in particular are undergoing change. And we worked out in our mapping that it was 40% of the river's banks were within opportunity areas, so areas designated by the mayor for large-scale development. So that's a lot of change, and surely that's the moment to really sort of make sure that the right social infrastructure is put in, that the right cultural infrastructure is put in, and the right public realm is put into place. And so the last thing I wanted to say as a kind of opportunity for this is that there are some projects coming up that I think could really raise the bar of architecture and design and culture within the Thames, and I think really sort of help people to sort of accelerate through their expectations, almost raise their expectations from the river. One is the Illuminated River project, which is a project that's going to light 15 bridges along the Thames, which with an artist installation by an artist called Leo Villarreal with LDS Architects. And this project is really fascinating because it's the longest artwork in the world, but also it's going to completely change how people see the Thames at night, because people are going to interact with these bridges much more. The other thing that's going to have to happen in London over time are flood defences are going to have to be replaced, because the Thames barrier, which was introduced, the levels have been rising, so it needs to be replaced, and that's another opportunity. So all of these big infrastructural opportunities should be seen to really introduce fantastic public spaces and really kind of celebrate the role of the river within the city, which I think is what we're talking about across all these different cities.
Спасибо большое, Виктория.
Thank you so much, Victoria. a question was raised about common vision, design, architecture, but such a large-scale project as the renovation of Moscow River banks, first and foremost, it's a project that should be attractive to the city residents and businesses. And a question I wanted to put to Sergei Kuznetsov is, to what extent this large-scale Moscow city program, river-based, river-centered program, to what extent has it increased the investment attractiveness of the riverside areas, and to what extent the Moscow residents are feeling the consequences, the impacts of this program, how they responding to this program? Are there major investment projects like zeal, and they offer interesting riverside solutions. So do you think these projects result in increased investment attractiveness? I have a brief presentation on this topic. Actually, Pyotr Pavlovich has already spoken at length about engagement with Muscovites and the identification of different identities and features of different areas. I'll show you just a few slides. Clearly, in 2014, 2015, we had a bidding procedure, call for action. We called for different ideas, and Meganom actually won the competition, was awarded the contract. And we see a drastic increase in the interest towards the river. I think the river traffic is up 30 or 40%. We have Radisson Flotilla, and they're going to talk about it later. Those who do sports, you can attest to the fact that the number of joggers and athletes exercising along the Moscow River has dramatically increased. I do jogging in the Luzhniki area, and I must say that the number of joggers has increased dramatically. So people now have this renewed, reawoken need. Nobody actually came out in the streets clamoring for new recreational areas along the Moscow River. No, it was the initiative of the city authorities, and the people's response has been very positive, very strong, and this growing demand, we have responded to it. We've done a lot. I think we're going to meet this growing demand. The same goes for the investment attractiveness of the riverside areas. I'll just show you the development of investment projects in the riverside areas. It's a summary of the graph shown by the speakers before me. That's what the city authorities have done. We are currently in Zaryadye Park, and some part of the embankment of the Zaryadye Park, if you haven't seen it yet, make sure you just take a walk along the embankment at the lower edge of the park, and you will see the redevelopment. And it's a new interpretation of the bank, and that was our response and our contribution. Just moving away from the zeal project, zeal is a good example, but we need to come to terms with Piotr regarding the questions. Actually, a lot work is underway based on Marc Chagall's drawings. Pyotr Pavlovich has mentioned the idea to link all these spaces together so that you can jog, you can cycle over long stretches, so that people can do it over many kilometers. Speaking about the designer's standpoint, it's been mentioned several times. To sum it up, we've gone through different stages in the city of Moscow, different attitudes to the Moscow River. some years ago, the river was heavily used as a transport route. Then there was a period when the riverside areas were used as a cattle ground. Then in the 30s, in 1930s, the river was connected to the Volga River. The Moscow River was connected to the Volga River. You know, previously the water was completely different. And with the completion of that project, Moscow River Volga project, Moscow River was used as a facade of the city. Yesterday we took a boat trip with some of the colleagues present here, and people asked why there are so many embankments and riverside areas used up for transportation purposes. Because in the 30s, when all those roads were built along the Moscow River, it was the height of the fashion. Now we are rethinking this, and we believe we should move in a different direction. Just a few examples to throw in. This is the western edge of the Moscow River. Before the sluices, before the canal, the Philly area, that's what it looks like right now. Completely wild riverside area, unused. But for us, it was a good example of engaging with the people, reaching out to the local communities. People came to us and told us that we're living on this river, we know what needs to be done, we have some ideas. And the local communities became our colleagues, or we partnered up with them, and we came up with this project. For example, a project of soft and gentle integration of the existing landscape without any major workovers. But again, it creates very soft, tactile environment, drawing on the values appreciated by the people living in that area. We're not changing anything dramatic, but I think this will beautify the embankment. As we move towards the city center, again, we see a brand new development. This area, Riverside area, becomes a hotspot for investment. You see a very active development. It used to be completely wild, unoccupied, formerly brownfield area, which was not used properly for various reasons. So we have a derelict area, decrepit, brownfield, and now, the next slide, we have this project. It has already been built. It's rendering, but we were building it. This is our present-day response to the river. That's what Yuri was talking about. And speaking of the quality of the water, it's not so bad as far as I know, but it's a whole different topic. Yes, the purification systems we use, and yes, but we keep this in mind, and we want to project this image. We want to support this image, even though this bank is not a natural one. So we realize that we need to strengthen the banks and create some artificial environment, because it's not the reflection of the natural landscape. But again, I think this will send a good signal to the people. Another example, similar case, again, you see the development, huge interest in the riverside properties. Prices are going up. Even though a few years ago it was the least developed and the least popular area, was on the periphery of people's interests. And because usually if you have part of your property bordering the river, it wasn't used, it was the backside property. Now it's turning into a facade, and our real estate statistics shows that the attitude is changing, and we are responding to this changes by coming up with projects like this or this. I'm just leafing through my presentation. again, you see a good combination of active development activities, good investments, and so again, the idea is to use the banks in a completely different vein. To sum it up, it's one of the examples. The zeal project. This is the zeal project. And I believe that we would be able to create a string of very interesting spaces, varying spaces. That's what Yuri Eduardovich was talking about after they landed the contract. The concept of pulsating accents along the river, which will serve as ports, points of entrance, points of entry for the passenger traffic. We don't have a river-wide passenger traffic along the Moscow River, but we're working on it. We are designing the piers, the docking stations, the ticketing system. But it's not only a transport hub. These points should become magnets for cultural activities and magnet for community life. Thank you, Sergei. Now I'd like to give the floor to Alexandros Washburn, who was part of Michael Bloomberg's very progressive administration, who was a chief urban designer. And so he oversaw numerous projects. New York is a great example of a very concentrated, highly concentrated city, but it's still a very lively city, a very open city, livable place. Every time you go to New York, you feel the difference. You feel that the city is evolving, it's changing, it's improving. Its public spaces are improving, and the areas related to the river, the bay are developing and improving. Alexander, could you please tell us about your role and about the changes on the banks of New York and the changes that the banks of New York are undergoing?
Thank you very much, Peter. Before I was chief urban designer, I was a private architect who designed waterfronts in New York City. My goal was to combine nature and the city. This is our project in Harlem, on the Hudson River. When I became chief urban designer, I brought this sensibility with me, that nature and the city are one. The High Line project, Brooklyn Bridge Park. Then on October 29th, 2012, something happened. Hurricane Sandy happened. My city was flooded. My home was flooded. As great as the city of New York was, the North Atlantic was greater. It was a very humbling experience, but it was also a call to action. Our waterfronts are the front lines. Where the city meets the water is where the city meets its fate. The shoreline is the bright line of resilience. What is resilience? It's the ability to take a punch and come back better. So the promise of our waterfronts is to build resilience, economically, physically, and socially. So what environmental problems can be resolved at the waterfront? Well, clearly flooding. What economic problems can be resolved? Redevelopment. We've seen that here from Sergei, that the waterfront invites development. But the immediate question is landscaping. In Japan, they're building a 10-meter wall, a simple concrete wall for resilience. That's not going to work. It may work technically, but it is not going to work socially. We need new waterfronts in New York. Indeed, I'm proposing a new island to protect Brooklyn. And these waterfronts will be public parks. They will be steep. They will protect us. But they will first and foremost be designed as public places, because it is the public place that develops social resilience as the park develops physical resilience. In New York, Brooklyn Bridge Park is one of my favorite places. People from every walk of life go there, rich, poor, from every race on the planet, every country. They are there together at the same time, and they behave towards each other in a manner of respect. That respect translates into cohesion. That cohesion translates into a social resilience. So I say this to underline the extremely important, well beyond aesthetic purposes of our waterfronts, both for social purposes and physical purposes. But I have to say that they are very expensive things, very expensive. And here I want to come back to a model that can save us. That is the model of the High Line, the park that we made out of a disused railroad on the west side of Manhattan. Now, when people think of the High Line, you think of the walk you take down this very beautiful park by the same designers as here, as our idea. Yes, it's beautiful, but the project was not just the park. The project was an entire district around the park, where every lot was designed from an urban design point of view. How tall, what shape, what purpose, what occupancy. So as this design was put into law, before the conversion of the park, we put in $100 million of public money into the park, and then billions of private dollars started coming in, building the area around us to the specifications we wished to protect views to the park, to create a setting for the park like a jewel. This is a technique that we have to apply to our waterfronts in order to achieve the expense of resilience. When we plan a waterfront, we are planning the area around it, not just for access, but for how to capture the private investment that will come in and support the public investment. In short, it's a question of balance, a balance of private funding and public funding coming together to create a system. Remember, I want to stress this. Very often people think of public works as things. You build them once, you're done. No, they're systems. They evolve over time, socially. They evolve physically. Things change, and you must be able to adapt. So I'll leave you with these 3 points, because nothing in a city happens unless you align the politics, the finance, and the design. In politics, balance the bottom up with the top down. In finance, leverage public with private. And finally, in design, it is not just aesthetics, it is a purpose. It is an engineering achievement to balance resilience with the beauty of an open and attractive public space. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Александрос.
Thank you very much. I think we are going to come back to your experience when we have questions and answers. And now I'd like to give the floor to Olga Kotova. Today I had 2 tours on Zaryadye, and I always was noticing your wonderful fleet of ships. Can you tell us more about your fleet and your idea? Because right now, actually, your boats, they are really a landmark on the river. Everyone notices them. What can you do for the Moscow, and what are you doing for Moscow already now? Thank you very much for your attention and for your questions. That's great that now the river is actually a separate object which is discussed at a forum. When we just appeared on the river 10 years ago, when we had first boats there, it was actually before the official announcement that Moscow is a priority for the Moscow government. And this is a great example of the fact that private investment cooperates with authorities and engages guests and city dwellers. As a result, we can develop infrastructure, we can develop the river. So our first boats went on the river in 2009. We had a certain positioning, of course, and we had two key topics, two key goals. First of all, the first appearance of ships was in winter. We introduced round-the-year navigation on the river. So traditionally before, boat trips, that was the thing of the summer. But we decided to extend this season for boat transportation as leisure transportation. Besides, we introduced restaurant service on our boats. It was the new type of entertainment. Before that, it was possible just to have a leisure trip on a small boat from May until September as the guided tour. But we wanted to introduce something else. Our main focus for us were the tourists, the guests of the city. And actually, the first boats that we had there, first 5 of them were built as part of the infrastructure of hotels. And the first quay was also next to the hotel. But we realized that guests and city dwellers have further needs, and we wanted to think about special offer for Muscovites, because there was no tradition of attracting attention towards the river. In 2008, 2009, the river didn't have historical significance anymore. It's not the main artery, the main street of the city. Actually, the name of the city is the same as the name of the river. This means that historically the Moscow River was extremely important. We realized that we need to create content, not just a restaurant, not just good food. We thought that we can give the river cultural significance. So we started organizing some topical tours, and it was interesting for Muscovites as well. Yeah, some people were saying, yeah, I've been on the river, all views are the same, embankments are the same, why should I go on a boat trip one more time? But we started proposing something absolutely new. Now we have 600,000 people who use our boat per year. That's a big number of people. And we see that more and more people are now interested in taking a boat trip. More people are interested in the river itself. There are new embankments. There are new interesting spaces around. And this year we launched new river trams, and they have the transportation function, more or less. We connected 8 quays together, and it's the great touristic route, and it's very convenient to travel from one site to another. And when they travel by water, they attract attention of everyone to the river, and it's actually rather nice to travel on water. You don't need to go on a bus. There is no problem of congestion, because for now on the Moscow River there is not so much traffic. When we saw the renovation of embankments, we realize that we have a lot of opportunities. Now we have the new cableway across the river. More and more festivals are organized on the embankments. Originally, this light festival, the Circle of Light, was held far away from the river, but later on, this festival started to include the river in the program. Bratevsky Park, for example, is now the place for this festival, and you can use up to 10 boats. As part of the festival, you can travel on the boat and see and enjoy fireworks from water. And this is a great example because you need to attract investments for improving the water facilities. If we do that, people will understand that river, it's not just something nice and pretty. This is a business opportunity. If you have a dialogue with the state, if you know what are the needs of tourists or Muscovites, you can create new projects which will be promoting the significance of the river. So, for example, when we started our theatrical cruises, we saw very great results. It's not just going on a boat. It's also an opportunity to get immersed into the culture of the 19th century. You can feel a part of the play by Anton Chekhov. So that's the combination between architecture, culture. You are on the river. That's something absolutely great. Everyone is interested to participate. Russian tourists, international tourists are attracted. So I think we need to promote the river and we need to do what we are already doing. Olga, thank you very much. The river is unique because it goes throughout the city and it combines people who live on the outskirts and who live in the city, in the center. And now I'd like to give the floor to Alexei Shaposhnikov. The whole program of renovating the territory around Moscow. Do you feel the transformation of requests from Muscovites? What do Muscovites want with regards to the Moscow River? Dear audience, dear colleagues and experts, that's great to be here talking about the Thames, the situation in New York and the Moscow River. But I'd like to talk now about the second river of Moscow, Yauza. This river has three major spaces. First of all, it starts in the northwest of Moscow. It goes through 10 municipalities of Moscow. It's a situation similar to London, and we have very similar problems to what you have in London. Then this river goes through the National Reserve, Lasiny Ostrov Park. It has a special status. Then, after the Lasiny Ostrov Park, it is a river with granite embankments, which are similar to embankments of the Moscow River. I'd like to talk about the first part of this river in the northwest of Moscow. It's completely different there. And this is surrounded by reserves. It's surrounded by nature. That's why there are very specific legal requirements and some special requests from Muscovites. Before, I would say it was an industrial river. There were lots of factories along the river. But now the economy changes and requests from Muscovites change accordingly. The Yauza project, that's creation of the historical and natural park Yauza. So Yauza is like a milestone and everything is created around it. The project was set up in 2014 after the Muscovites addressed deputies of the municipalities, and I'd like to thank Pyotr Birukov. He's helping us a lot. We wouldn't be able to solve our problems without their help. This project is something very, very beautiful. I can't describe it with words. Let's look at a short video. Yauza is the main waterway of Moscow. It takes a significant territory in the northwest of Moscow. Landscape is not homogeneous around it. Yauza Park project is aimed at using this diversity of landscapes and creation of the recreation space around it. The name of the river comes from a name Uza, which is translated as the link. So this river is the link between different spaces. Pedestrian and cycling routes, all of them are connected, interconnected. The territory around it is 480 hectares. This river starts from Lasiny Ostrov Park, then it goes to the western administrative department, and then it reaches the Moscow River. Historically, it was the river for transporting cargo from factories in the suburbs of Moscow. Now these factories are non-existent, and now the only purpose of this river is irrigation, is recreation. Yeah, let's talk about green standards. Let's talk about parks. Yauza doesn't have granite embankments. It has natural coasts. You can't have cobbled pathways here, otherwise animals won't be able to get out and into the water. 1.5 million people live around this river in the north of Moscow. 4,000 people participated in the survey, answering questions about what they'd like to see around this river. We also used big data crunching. So we decided that we'll reduce the traffic around this river, we'll create new economic hubs, we'll improve integration with the suburbs. There is a similar park in London. According to the state program, there was a decision to renovate the territory in a similar way near the river. The park in London is larger than what we have around Yauza River, but it's also we're talking only about a northwest administrative district, but this river is actually longer, and we can prolong theoretically this park outside of this administrative district. As a result, we can have an environmental cluster, we can create some sporting routes, we can organize marathons or cycling paths around this river. So this will be an absolutely unique project. Yauza Park, it's a very long project from the Moscow Circle Road to the Rostokino aqueduct. As a result, we need to have a unified center of managing this project. Yauza Park should be managed by a legal entity, autonomous state company, which will have unified goals and will coordinate different authorities. Authorities which are responsible for maintaining and renovating the spaces. And that's necessary in order to we have the unified activities all along the river. The last photo was very important. Now, beavers and some other animals, they came back to the river. And we're doing a lot in order to preserve plants from the Red Book, and we need to do everything to preserve the nature while creating the comfortable lifestyle for Muscovites and tourists. A very important question here, which can be the conclusion of this film and your statement. The use of spaces around the year, and Piotr was talking about this, and now I have a question to you and to Alexei about that. How are you going to use these new territories and public spaces during the winter? Or in between the seasons, during spring and autumn, when the skies are gray, when there is slush on the roads. So usually we see wonderful green photos of parks and rivers, but for 6 months in Moscow we have a rather challenging weather conditions. Yes, we wanted to create facilities which will be used throughout the year. For example, the baseball field. This is the only field in Russia where there is a base of the national team of Russia, and it works 12 months a year. There are very good facilities. During autumn, you can rent bicycles. During winter, we have skiing tracks. We can create artificial snow there. Some of the parks are also parks for all the seasons of the year. And actually, almost all of the parks around the river are active and are visited during any season. For example, the roller skating field is what we have in one of the parks near the river. Our goal is to ensure the spaces which are used all the year round. We have heating, we have lighting, we have sewage, everything. All these parks can be used 24 hours. When it's spring or when it's autumn with temperature below 5 degrees, you can have artificial ice for skating. Besides, we have closed facilities, closed stadiums for entertainment events or for sports events. Every park has a very well-developed program of activities. We started from the first Krymskaya embankment 7 years ago. It was the first project for us. We had some small markets with books, with electronic devices. This embankment was unkempt, but now this embankment is beautiful and it goes up to the Sparrow Hills district. It's a very beautiful space. You can ski there. We have alpine skiing there. So these parks work around the clock.
A question, what can residents do with the river in wintertime? How can they use the river in the wintertime? Well, actually, next question, as a follow-up to the flotilla presentation, this route, it connects the central part of the city as it is. So a boat can stop at the park, people get off the board, enjoy the views, the scenery, then hop on another boat, continue, arrive at the Gorky Park or Yakimanka, disembark, enjoy the Kremlin, go to the city. A long route. Well, actually, our parks are actively used in the wintertime as well. They're not empty. There are people going there, and you can move from one park to another, even without having to resort to the land transport. I would like to draw your attention to the fact, as we were working on the Yauza Park, the idea was to ensure the penetration of the river bank. There were some issues, and we extended the river line, and now this can be used for marathon races. Nordic walking is becoming very popular among Muscovites. We have this longevity program run by the Moscow government. So the banks will be filled with people irrespective of the season. Talking genuinely, when we started this program, My Street program, when we started with the public parks program, we were thinking of creating comfort. We succeeded. We wanted to provide Muscovites with opportunities to do all kinds of leisure activities. We succeeded. Now we are rethinking all these developments. Now we're focusing on the health of city dwellers, city residents, be it New York, Moscow, London, other cities. We have already in pursuance of this program to ensure good health of the residents, these parks can be used for that. And so people can go jogging or can go cycling. You don't have to go to the Luzhniki Stadium in order to exercise. You can just step outside of your apartment block. You can walk or you can jog, enjoy the view, and live 5 years longer. Actually, yesterday we were hosting our colleagues from Singapore, the Zaryadye, and their new program is 400 steps to the nearest park. I wanted to ask I want to put question to Sergei Kuznetsov and Yuri Grigoryan. Since this competition, this call for action related to the redevelopment of the waterfront areas, do you feel that the river still has the potential to unite the city, unite the residents of the city? Yes, it's not so much a feeling. We are seeing actual projects. A lot of things have been materialized, and a lot of project financing have been provided. But 2 months ago, we had detailed river development plans, and we found financial sources for those projects. So it's not only on the theoretical plane, but we already have hard money and investments. The connectivity we want to reach along the Moscow River banks, I think we're going to see it happen very soon. We're going to feel it and touch it and enjoy it as we do cross-country skiing or jog or cycle. So it's very near. It's just around the corner. Back in 2013, we had a project which we put forward. The project was about instituting a day of the Moscow River. So we thought that there should be a one day when all residents get to the river, get to the river banks. We were thinking of maybe of a flotilla of boats headed by the Moscow mayor, and other residents join that flotilla on their vessels, and people could, get together, maybe talk about the river. And with Sergei Olegovich, we discussed an opportunity for a blue fireworks at the end of such day, and you can use drones with cameras to broadcast the footage of the river lighting up. Again, we can unite people through a holiday, through celebration. But it's not only, about celebrations. People can talk business, can discuss their daily lives, and that's how a river can become one of the links uniting people. Shall we have a separate roundtable on this idea? Do you think it's a good idea to have a day of the Moscow River or River Day? Well, we are lobbying the vessel owners. We've been lobbying for this for several years. And a couple years ago, there was some financing provided, but it didn't materialize. But we still hope that this holiday will take place. The mic is off. Yes, I think we can move from this hall to the lady's office who's in charge of that. And I think we'll find her and we'll put forth this idea. Alexandros and Victoria, I wanted to ask you, we've just raised an issue of engaging residents in this project. For example, establishing a day of water or day of the river in your respective cities. To what extent do you rely on the opinions of city residents? When do they support you in your work? When do they oppose you in your work?
Us, we would call it engagement, and we would say it's absolutely critical to most of the projects that we work on. And I think in the UK there's something that it's changing slowly, but generally engagement with the public tends to happen at the end of projects when people are presented with a design and they have to react. And actually, what we try to do in our practice, in our urban design practice, is to flip that on its head. So we really try and engage with people at the earliest possible stage, because actually it's a fantastic resource for the design process. We all engage with the city every day, and so people are experts in their own neighborhoods, and that's a really valuable piece of information. And I think that's happening more and more, particularly with projects led by local authorities and cities, or the city kind of departments in London. That's certainly improving a lot. And I think I just wanted to touch on the idea of the festival, or the kind of because I think that's a really great idea. And in London we have this Totally Thames Festival, it's called, and it's really it's actually a really successful month of celebrations along the river. And the other thing that's a really nice way of engaging with the wider city is this thing called the London Curriculum, which is this curriculum for schools where they learn through engagement with the built environment in London. So they can visit the river and learn about London that way, and about science and maths and all the rest.
I don't know about London and Moscow. This is all sounding too nice. In New York, we fight. And that's how we reach a decision. There are two very famous New Yorkers. Robert Moses, he was the power broker, top-down highways through neighborhoods, and then Jane Jacobs. He was the mother with big glasses who fought.
Famous guy.
Community organizer. They fought to a standstill. Their battle continues today, even though they're long gone. Everything we do in New York is the balance between the two. In my practice, Now, we think that Jane Jacobs needs new glasses to be able to fight well. So we've developed these augmented reality goggles that lets you see what's proposed in your neighborhood on your own time and lets you comment. And then we take those comments and incorporate them. Listen, it'll never stop, but it's that balance that I cherish. And when I was in government and I was the top down, I actually learned from the bottom up. And now that I'm in the bottom up, I seek to bring my projects forward to the government.
Спасибо. У нас еще совсем немного времени осталось.
Thank you. A question about the purity of water, the quality of water. When can we go swimming next to the Zaradya Park? Just imagine all of us proceeding to the bank, stooping down and drinking from the river. Well, the purpose of our project is to make sure that the effluent waters that the Moscow River receives from plants and factories should be clean enough to allow fisheries to flourish in the Moscow River. The sewage that goes into the Moscow River is clean enough for us to go into fisheries. So you can actually go swimming in the Moscow River in the Bratyevo district and down the river flow, because the river flows into the Volga, to the Caspian Sea. We are implementing the state programs. Our cleaning facilities, water treatment facilities are up and running. They're functioning well. Work is underway in the Lyuberetsky district. The old plants, water treatment plants, are going to be worked over in the next 2 years. Thank you, Pyotr Pavlovich. I can add a question. You're speaking about the purity of water in the Moscow River. Today, it has certain specific certain features. So the water that enters the city of Moscow does not change as it goes through the city. In some cases, actually, it's even cleaner on the way out than on the way in. And speaking about banks of the Moscow River, on the Yauza River, and 500 other rivers and rivulets in Moscow, it all boils down to the development of the waterfront areas. And we are creating parks. We're moving away industries, relocating plants and factories. We're relocating the brownfield, the leftover equipment, materials, soil. And so all these efforts are contributing to improved purity of the water. So the combination of all these activities, engineering solutions and natural solutions, in the last 3 years, 150 kilometers of river drainage was addressed, and as we build new subdivisions, they're using the new systems for the treatment of runoff water. And of course, this contributes to the positive outcome. Thank you. I wanted to thank all panelists separately. I want to say to Alexander that we're nice in our capacities as panelists, but as we step outside of our roles as panelists, we turn into fighters and we fight for the clean banks of the Moscow River. Thank you.